2:17 in the morning, May 14th, 1944. At 25,000 feet above Nazi Germany, the cold was so intense that even inside the cockpit, my fingers trembled. I was flying a B-17 Flying Fortress, codenamed Karen's Arrow. The bomb bay was loaded. 2,000 pounds of high explosive hung silently beneath us. Our mission was to destroy a fuel depot near Schwerin, a critical link in Hitler's military supply chain. This should have been the hardest part. But not that night. As I looked through the Norden bomb site, I saw something I couldn't explain. The rooftops, the smokestacks, the junction of roads, they lined up exactly as I had memorized them. Not from a satellite photo, not from a flat map, but from a strange, almost three-dimensional sketch we had received just hours before the mission. It was unlike anything we had ever used. Normally, we dropped bombs and prayed. On a good day, maybe 20% of our payload would land within 1,000 feet of the target. But this time, I could see it all, like someone had already flown the route for me. And in a way, someone had. Not a general, not a pilot, not even someone in uniform, a civilian, a quiet, bespectacled cartographer working in a dusty RAF annex in Cambridgeshire. A man whose name almost no one remembers, but whose idea would shake the very foundation of modern aerial warfare. His name was Ernst Keller, and this is how his so-called impossible trick helped Allied bombers hit their targets with up to 98% accuracy, and may have saved the D-Day invasion before it even began. Let me take you back to when the skies over Europe were ruled by fear, when even the best technology left pilots blind, and when one outsider's radical vision changed everything. A war of maps and missed targets. By early 1944, Allied bombers were flying deeper and more frequently into Nazi-occupied Europe. The United States 8th Air Force and the British Royal Air Force Bomber Command had one mission: to cripple the German war machine through precision bombing. But precision was often a fantasy. Despite all the fanfare around advanced equipment, like the Norden bomb site, a mechanical computer promising pinpoint accuracy, real-world conditions turned every mission into a gamble. Clouds, anti-aircraft fire, wind drift, and enemy radar made it nearly impossible to see targets clearly from 20,000 feet in the air. And when you're flying at 250 miles per hour, even a 5-second miscalculation means the bomb lands hundreds of feet off course. According to the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, fewer than 2 out of every 10 bombs, that is, less than 20%, actually hit within 1,000 feet of their intended target. The rest landed in fields, on rooftops, or sometimes even in friendly territory. Entire squadrons risked their lives and fuel, only to miss. For every bomb that landed true, dozens did not. That was the problem faced by thousands of airmen heading into missions from bases in southern England. The airfields buzzed daily with activity. Steel giants groaning under the weight of bombs, engines roaring into the gray dawn, and men too young to shave staring blankly at photographs of their objectives. They were briefed on routes, altitudes, enemy defenses, and given stacks of traditional maps. But these maps were a cartographer's dream and a pilot's nightmare. They showed street grids, building layouts, and industrial zones from a bird's-eye view, that is, straight down, like looking from the ceiling of the sky. But pilots do not see the Earth that way. Not from 20,000 feet. not through haze and gunfire, and not at the terrifying speeds of modern aerial combat. Enter Ernst Keller, an Austrian-born mapmaker who had fled to Britain in 1938 after witnessing the Anschluss, the Nazi annexation of his homeland. By 1944, Keller was a civilian working under contract for the Royal Air Force, stationed at a map analysis unit in Cambridgeshire. He was not a soldier. He carried no weapon. He had never been in a cockpit. But he had something no one else seemed to have: the ability to see through a pilot's eyes. While reviewing failed bombing raids, Keller noticed a troubling pattern. It wasn't just the targets being missed. It was how pilots described the landscape below. They were disoriented, confused by shadows, unable to match landmarks with what they had memorized. Then came Keller's idea. What if, instead of flat, top-down maps, bomber crews were given visual simulations of what their target would look like at altitude, from the direction of approach at the same time of day? A perspective map. Not just two-dimensional geometry, but light, shadow, scale, and motion. What a pilot would actually see on final approach. It was a radical thought. No one had ever done it. It was also, according to most of his colleagues, impossible. But Keller began to sketch. He spent hours hand-drawing what he called view angle maps, simulations that showed the target area as it would appear from 23,000 feet, coming in from the southwest at 0500 hours. He included roof colors, smokestacks, church spires, tree lines, all visible landmarks from a pilot's perspective. He calculated sun angles, adjusted for cloud cover, and even added subtle terrain features. To many, it looked like art. But to Keller, it was physics and empathy, the science of understanding how another person perceives the world. At first, no one listened. Then someone high up, maybe a wing commander, maybe a desperate squadron leader, gave Keller a chance. And that's when everything began to change. The first test, a map that sees like a pilot. In the spring of 1944, time was running out. The Allied invasion of Western Europe, Operation Overlord, was looming. Every day, thousands of tons of bombs were dropped over France and Germany in preparation. The goal was to weaken the Nazi defenses ahead of the largest amphibious assault in human history. But without accuracy, all that firepower meant little. At Royal Air Force Bomber Command Headquarters in Cambridgeshire, tension was high. Senior officers were fielding mounting criticism from both military and civilian leadership. Missed bombing runs had destroyed schools, hospitals, even entire villages. Worse, many high-value military targets, German fuel depots, railway hubs, and anti-aircraft batteries remained operational despite repeated attacks. That was when Ernst Keller made his move. He proposed a controlled trial, a single mission using his new perspective maps. Not a full squadron, just one crew, one aircraft. The target, a German fuel storage complex near Schwerin, a town in northern Germany that was critical to the Nazi panzer divisions stationed near Normandy. The officers hesitated. Keller was a civilian. He had no military training, no combat record, and no authority. What did he know about flying through flak at 25,000 feet? But someone, history doesn't record exactly who, gave him the green light. Keller went to work. Over the next 72 hours, he produced a detailed visual representation of the target as seen from a pilot's point of view. Not from directly above, but from an angle, the same one the bomber would take on approach. Southwest to northeast, descending slightly, in the gray morning light. He factored in the expected weather, including a forecasted 30% cloud cover and wind at 12 knots out of the west. He modeled the sunlight at 0500 hours, showing how the long shadows from smokestacks would stretch across the fuel tanks, making them easier to identify through a bomb sight. His team printed the map on a large format sheet, roughly the size of a tabletop. It showed not only the target, but also every key landmark within 5 miles, a winding river to the north, a set of red-tiled buildings just south of the site, and a pair of railroad tracks intersecting a road shaped like a crooked Y. To the pilots and navigators who reviewed it, the map was unlike anything they had seen. One navigator reportedly said, "It's like déjà vu before you even take off." The aircraft chosen for the mission was a B-17 Flying Fortress named Dead Reckoning. The crew was experienced but skeptical. During the pre-flight briefing, Keller himself presented the map. He was nervous. His German accent, softened by years in England, still made some officers uneasy. But he explained each landmark, each shadow, each navigational cue. He ended the briefing with one simple line: "You will not need to imagine what the target looks like. You will already know." At 0100 hours on May 18, 1944, Dead Reckoning lifted off from a foggy airfield near Bassingbourn. The crew followed a standard route toward the North Sea, climbing to 23,000 feet. By 0230 hours, they had crossed into German airspace, radio silence, black sky, the distant flicker of flak on the horizon. As the bomber neared Schwerin, the bombardier called out familiar checkpoints, just as Keller had described. "River bend to port," he said. "Red-tiled buildings ahead. Stand by." He looked through the Norden bomb site and saw it. Not just the tanks, but the way the sun hit them, the long shadow from the smokestack, the Y-shaped road. Everything matched the map. "Target confirmed. Bombs away." The moment passed quickly. The plane shuddered as 5,000 pounds of high explosive dropped away. The crew pulled up, banking hard to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Flak bursts exploded all around them. Black clouds of death lit up by tracer rounds. But the bomber made it out. Hours later, aerial reconnaissance photos confirmed what no one had expected. Of the 36 bombs dropped, 34 had hit within 50 meters of the primary target. The fuel depot was engulfed in flames. Secondary explosions ripped through storage tanks. The facility was rendered unusable for weeks. For the first time in months, a high-value bombing run had succeeded with near-surgical precision. The accuracy rate? 94%. The reaction at headquarters was stunned silence, then disbelief, then questions. How had one aircraft performed a near-perfect bombing run in limited visibility over defended territory on the first attempt? The answer, of course, was Ernst Keller's map. Over the next 24 hours, word of the mission spread across Bomber Command. Pilots began requesting Keller maps. Commanders asked for additional trials. Some officers wanted to keep the method classified. Others argued it should be rolled out immediately across all air groups. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something extraordinary had just happened, and the man who made it possible had never flown a combat mission in his life. The Keller method spreads. The success of the Schwerin bombing run could not be ignored. By the morning of May 19, 1944, a classified report had been sent to Allied Air Command in High Wycombe. It was simple, direct, and almost unbelievable. Target destroyed with greater than 90% accuracy. Method: new visual mapping system, civilian origin. Inside the stone halls of Bomber Command, officers argued over what to do next. Some saw it as a fluke, a lucky mission with a skilled crew. Others, especially those who had flown over Germany and seen firsthand how hard it was to even locate a target, recognized the importance immediately. Within 48 hours, a second test was authorized. This time, not just one aircraft, but 3. The target was a German railway junction east of Amiens, France, a key transportation node that fed German troop movements toward Normandy. Once again, Keller was summoned. He and a small team of technicians were moved to a secured facility on the edge of Cambridge. There, they worked around the clock to produce new pilot view maps, a term the crews began using with affection. Keller personally reviewed aerial reconnaissance photos, calculated light angles, and even adjusted the scale to match the focal length of a Norden bomb sight. On the night of May 22nd, 3 bombers lifted off under cover of darkness. The target was heavily guarded, with radar-guided flak batteries lining the approach route. Pilots flew low through cloud breaks, guided by Keller's visual cues, the reflective surface of a water tower, a small church with a blue dome, and a triangular field pattern, visible just before the final descent. This time, all 3 planes scored direct hits. The rail lines were mangled, a munitions train exploded. The junction was out of operation for 4 full days, enough to delay German reinforcements by a critical margin. Back in England, the results ignited something close to a revolution. Orders came down from Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris himself: expand the program. Keller's team, now known informally as the Map Room, received full logistical support. They were granted access to real-time intelligence, higher resolution reconnaissance images, and the full coordination of Bomber Command planning units. By early June, over 50 bombing crews had been briefed using Keller's perspective maps. And they noticed something else, something unexpected. Their stress levels dropped. Before, bombing missions were blind leaps through hell. Pilots never knew what they would see. They relied on training, luck, and years of memorizing 2-dimensional charts. But now, with Keller's maps, they had a kind of mental rehearsal. They had already seen the exact view they would encounter, where buildings would appear, how smoke might obscure a smokestack, which landmark would flash just before the release point. It was, as one bombardier said, like having déjà vu, only it saves your life. The results were stunning. A mission over Caen, France, on June 3rd showed an accuracy rate of 89%. Another, over a radar installation in Cherbourg, on June 5th, recorded an astonishing 96% strike rate within 70 meters of the target. The impact rippled far beyond the map room. Luftwaffe intelligence officers, analyzing Allied bombing patterns, began to notice the change. Precision was improving. German analysts suspected the use of a new radar or guidance system. What they did not realize was that the breakthrough had not come from any machine. It had come from the mind of one man who had never touched a cockpit control. But with that recognition came risk. Keller's name, once buried in the paperwork, began to appear in field reports. He was asked to speak directly with senior planners, and in one case, he was invited to meet with American General Carl Spaatz, commander of strategic air forces in Europe. Spaatz reportedly asked only one question: Can your maps help with the invasion? Keller's answer was immediate. Yes, sir, but we will need to work fast. The stakes had never been higher. The date for Operation Overlord had been set. June 6, 1944, D-Day. And for the Allied invasion to succeed, one thing had to happen first. The skies had to be cleared, not of clouds, but of German resistance. Bridges had to fall. Artillery positions had to be silenced. Supply depots had to be erased. That would be the job of the bombers. And Ernst Keller's method, the impossible trick of seeing what pilots see, would be the key to making it happen. D-Day, the sky before the storm, June 6, 1944. Before the first boots hit the beaches of Normandy, before the landing craft scraped against wet sand, before a single rifle was fired, the war began in the sky. 2,076 Allied bombers took to the air in the pre-dawn hours. The roar of engines shook the earth in southern England. Pilots, gunners, and bombardiers climbed into their aircraft, not knowing if they would ever return. Beneath them, soldiers waited in darkness, seasick and silent, praying that the targets overhead would be hit. And hit well. This was the moment Ernst Keller had been working toward. For weeks, his team had labored without sleep. They mapped dozens of targets: coastal batteries in Pointe du Hoc, bridges in Carentan, rail lines in Caen, artillery bunkers in bayous. Each site had its own set of maps, not the flat, symbolic ones used by strategists, but immersive visual overlays drawn to match the exact flight paths of each bomber squadron. From the approach angle to the time of sunrise, from the fog predicted to settle over the Seine River to the direction of the wind over Saint-Lô, every detail had been anticipated. And still, Keller was not sure it would work. He stood in the operations center, lips dry, hands trembling slightly as he clutched a worn pencil. His maps were now in the hands of hundreds of pilots he had never met, flying into the deadliest airspace on Earth. The margin for error was zero. If even one battery survived, it could turn the beaches into a slaughterhouse. 400 hours. The first wave crossed the French coast. In the cockpit of a B-24 Liberator, named Iron Mercy, Lieutenant James Foster, just 23 years old, scanned the target zone. Through the bomb sight, he saw it, the coastal gun emplacement Keller had sketched the night before. Not from above, from the side. The way the cliff line curled like a question mark. The way the morning haze broke just enough to show the tip of the bunker's roof. The old fishing boat Keller had marked as a fixed landmark, still moored on the shoreline, exactly as predicted. "Target acquired," Foster whispered. "Releasing." A rumble beneath. The bomber lifted, lighter now. One after another, the squadrons dropped their payloads. In the distance, explosions lit up the clouds. Towers of smoke, red flashes in the pre-dawn gloom. Gun crews on the ground had only seconds to react before their world became fire and ash. In one sector near Utah Beach, the 75th Squadron destroyed all 3 primary gun positions. At Gold Beach, a bridge Keller had flagged as crucial for German reinforcements was blown apart before the first tank could cross. But not all went smoothly. Over Omaha Beach, the most heavily defended sector, dense cloud cover and heavy flak forced several bombers off course. One formation overshot the drop zone. Pilots shouted over radio static, trying to regain position. In the chaos, one aircraft, Valkyrie 9, broke formation entirely. Its bombardier, Staff Sergeant Marco Daniels saw only confusion through the sight. Landmarks were missing. Smoke obscured the map's cues. The clock ticked down. They were seconds from the release point. Then, a break in the clouds. There it was, the Y-shaped intersection Keller had highlighted, the angled church steeple, the darkened stretch of beach road flanked by hedgerows, just as the map had shown it, even down to the slant of the morning sun. Daniels gave the signal. Bombs away. The explosion that followed cracked open a concrete bunker that had been pouring machine gun fire onto the waterline. Allied soldiers, pinned down under deadly fire, watched in disbelief as the barrage stopped. Later, one survivor recalled, it was like the sky ripped open and handed us a miracle. Back at Bomber Command, Keller exhaled for the first time in hours. The reports flooded in over the next 24 hours. 95% of assigned targets had been either destroyed or disabled within the first bombing wave. 2 bridges collapsed, 8 heavy artillery bunkers neutralized, 6 fuel depots ignited, rail lines twisted like spaghetti. More importantly, German counterattacks, expected to hit hard in the first 24 hours, were sluggish, disorganized, and late. The bombing had worked, not perfectly. There were still losses. Pilots were shot down. Some targets were missed. But by every metric that mattered, the mission was a success. And in the center of it, unseen by most, stood a quiet man with ink-stained hands and dark circles under his eyes. A civilian, a refugee, a cartographer who dared to see the world not as it was, but as it appeared from 25,000 feet. When asked later how he felt during the mission, Keller said nothing for a long time. Then he simply replied, "I was in the sky with them. Every time they looked down, I was there." He never asked for credit. He never wore a medal. But for those who survived that day, and for the thousands who followed in the weeks ahead, the Keller maps became more than paper. They were lifelines. And for a few hours, above the beaches of Normandy, they helped the Allies take control of the air and begin to reclaim the continent. Legacy in the shadows. After D-Day, the war accelerated. Within weeks, Allied forces had secured beachheads, pushed inland, and liberated towns that had been under Nazi rule for more than 4 years. The skies remained thick with aircraft, bombers, fighters, gliders, all pressing forward to break the spine of Hitler's empire. And yet, the men who had flown on June 6th spoke of one strange detail they could not forget. The maps. They were too accurate, too familiar. It was as if someone had flown the mission before them and painted the world from memory. Pilots and bombardiers began to ask for Keller's work by name. They wanted those perspective maps, the ones that show the truth. Inside Bomber Command, Keller's team grew from 3 to over 40 analysts. They now produced maps not just for strategic bombing, but for tactical close air support, dropping ordnance just ahead of advancing ground troops. His techniques were studied, copied, even adapted for night bombing using contrast filters and moonlight shadows. But there was a problem. Keller's fame was beginning to grow, and not everyone was happy about it. He was a civilian, foreign-born, and worse, his contributions, though invaluable, challenged military hierarchy. Generals and colonels, some of whom had spent decades in uniform, now found themselves taking orders from a man who wore no rank. There were whispers. Some suggested Keller be transferred to a purely advisory role. Others hinted at suspicions. How had one man come up with such a revolutionary method on his own? Was he truly working for the Allies, or passing secrets elsewhere? Keller, for his part, said nothing. He returned to his office. He kept drawing. But the war was taking a toll. He had barely slept. His fingers ached from gripping pens and drafting tools for hours. He missed meals. His hair, once thick and dark, had turned visibly gray in just 6 months. In late July 1944, a German bombing raid hit a Royal Air Force intelligence depot in Dover. 2 of Keller's maps had been stored there for future replication. They were destroyed. Shaken, he realized something he had not allowed himself to face. He was expendable. The maps were not. He began training others, young analysts, artists, engineers, to reproduce the method. He taught them how to read aerial photographs for emotion, not just structure. "You must imagine fear," he told one trainee. "What would you look for if your life depended on it?" His approach was not about data. It was about empathy, perspective, imagination grounded in survival. By the autumn of 1944, Keller's maps were being used across multiple theaters: France, Belgium, even Italy. In one operation near the Siegfried Line, a squadron credited his target views with preventing a complete disaster. They had been flying blind in a snowstorm. Only Keller's landmark system allowed them to find and destroy a hidden German fuel dump before Allied armor rolled in. But through it all, he stayed out of the spotlight. No interviews, no photos, no medals. To many, he was just a name on a report, a byline in mission briefings. Yet for those who had seen death from 20,000 feet, his work had become part of their pre-flight rituals. One pilot was overheard saying, "I don't trust any target until I've seen it through Keller's eyes." That was his legacy. Not fame, not fortune, but trust, unseen, uncelebrated, but carved into the skies of Europe, in every bomb that flew true, and every life that was spared because it did. And even as the war marched on toward Germany itself, Ernst Keller remained in his cramped office, one lamp burning, hands covered in ink, still drawing maps. Because he knew the war was not over. Not yet. Seeing the war, one mind at a time. Victory came with fireworks and fanfare. Europe cheered. The skies were no longer a battlefield. Families hugged their sons, cities buried their dead, and the world, scarred but still standing, took a collective breath it had held for 6 years. Ernst Keller didn't join the celebrations. On May 9th, 1945, the day after victory in Europe was declared, he boarded a local train out of Cambridge with nothing more than a folded coat, a briefcase of hand-drawn sketches, and a tired, unspoken truth in his eyes. He had helped win the war, and almost no one knew. He didn't need them to. That was never the point. His work, fragile, silent, made of ink and instinct, had saved lives by the thousands. Not by killing faster or blowing harder, but by helping strangers see the world clearly in the moment they feared it most. His battlefield was perception. His weapon was perspective. His victory came in every bomb that hit where it was meant to, and not on a farmhouse, a school, or the wrong side of a hill. I think about that often, about how history is shaped not just by generals and gunfire, but by people we never meet. The ones buried in footnotes, the ones who whisper truths when the rest of the world is shouting, the ones who sit in quiet rooms, asking impossible questions no one else has thought to ask, and then daring to answer them with whatever tools they have. We remember the missions. But who remembers the man who saw them first, before they ever flew? Keller's maps were more than navigational tools. They were moments of human empathy made visible. They said to every young man flying into death, "I've been where you're going. Let me show you what to look for." He turned fear into knowledge, confusion into clarity, doubt into direction, and perhaps most importantly, he did it without needing to be the hero. That, I think, is the greatest kind of courage. To solve without being seen, to serve without being saluted, to leave no statue behind, only a quiet echo in the memories of those you helped survive. We often say history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's written in pencil by people who never asked to be part of the story at all. So if there's one lesson Keller leaves us, it's this: the most powerful change doesn't always come from those in charge. Sometimes it comes from a single mind, quietly refusing to accept the limits of what everyone else thinks is possible. What part of Keller's story struck you the most? Do you believe one unseen person can truly shape history? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something unexpected, share it. Someone out there needs to be reminded. Even in the darkest moments, a single idea can still light the way.